I'm going to give you 5 tips to be able to argue better, argue intelligently. Number 1, words in and of themselves have no intrinsic meaning. It's not what you think. I'll explain that a little bit more in a few minutes. Number 2, communication equals appreciation. Communication equals appreciation. Number 3, there are 3 kinds of people who you'll argue with. Number 1, some get it with explanation, some get it without explanation, and some don't get it or will never get it, and that's okay. Number 4, epiphanies are self-induced. Number 5, finally, is that arguments are in the realm of intellect. So if you are watching me for the first time, my name is Ron John. I'm the author of Relationships 101 and the founder of Great Relationships University, the online course. And just so you can relate, I wasn't a great arguer. Somebody requested that I do this video because they've seen me argue in social media. And so they requested I do a video on how to argue. And I want to give you my 5 best fundamental tips. Now, there's a lot more to creating an argument. Now, you're not going to learn how to create an argument in this video, although what you are going to learn is how to be in an argument and how to form your argument. How to form your argument. The structure in which you can form your argument, because being ultimately guides you on what you should do. So if you don't know my story already, I migrated here from the Philippines when I was very, very young, and I couldn't speak a lick of English, and therefore I could not have good relationships, good friendships, because I was very, very shy and socially awkward because I couldn't speak English. I couldn't relate with my friends, and so I couldn't have great relationships, and all the way until I was an adult. And as an adult, I went through a divorce, and that set me on a depressive and suicidal time in my life until I read a book. And it wasn't until several years after high school, after I've sworn off never reading a book again, I read this book, and it was a weird book. It was a silly book on meeting women. But I got an epiphany from that. I realized that you could actually read books that teach you how to better your communication skills and better your relationship skills. And so from that day forward, I never, ever stopped. I became fanatic about personal development and growth, and especially in the realm of communication and relationships. So 10, 12 years passed, and I've never missed a single day of reading, and I've spent tens of thousands of dollars being around amazing mentors who taught me a lot about communication and social dynamics and politics and all of these things. And it wasn't until 12 years after that, 12 years of that experience, I've built a team in 64 countries. I've been around people who were tremendously successful, who made 6 figures a month in their business. And then after that, I've been in secret societies. I've trained sales organizations, and it wasn't until 12 years where I wrote my first book, Relationships 101, which you should, by the way, check out. And so by the end of this video, what I want you to take away from this video is I want you to be able to argue. And I want you to be able to argue intelligently. Not just to be able to argue, but argue intelligently. And I'll show you how to do that with these 5 tips. So what was it, number 1? Number 1 is words in and of themselves have no intrinsic meaning. It doesn't mean that words don't have meaning. Obviously, the only way you can understand what I'm saying is that words have meaning. What I mean by words intrinsically have no meaning, intrinsic meanings in and of itself, inside of itself, internally generated. Words, if you didn't speak English, if you didn't know any English, my words would have no meaning to you. So for meaning to exist requires an observer. It requires you giving it meaning. It requires my giving it meaning. And I'll show you what I mean here in a few minutes. Pun intended. Words in of themselves have no meaning. If I don't know how to speak well, I know a little bit of Japanese. I know a few Japanese words, but I don't know how to speak Japanese. Now, if I were to communicate with somebody who only spoke Japanese, who didn't speak English, we wouldn't be able to communicate. Why? Because words in and of themselves have no meaning. And the only way they can have meaning is if, number one, there are a couple of prerequisites for words to have meaning. Number one is that two people want to communicate, and they want to communicate using words. Not sign language, words. And so in order for that to happen, I have to understand their language. Also, in order for words to have meaning, and I'll show you how to get over this, don't worry. In order for words to have meaning, two people have to experience the same thing simultaneously and perceive it the same way, which nobody does, which is why even the most simple words, even the most banal of words are misconstrued and misappreciated by people. Why? It's because no two people can experience the same thing and give it the same word, stamp it with the same word, and say, this is what this means. So here's how you get over that when you go into an argument. Number one, you have to want to be able to communicate. I'll go over that. I'll go over wanting to communicate on the second tip. You must want to communicate with that person. Therefore, you must want to understand them. You must want to understand their position. In order for you to want to understand a position, it requires some empathy. Emotional intelligence oftentimes is a lot more important than intellectual intelligence, IQ. There's emotional IQ, which is tremendously important. It requires empathy on your part to want to understand where they're standing, to want to understand where they are coming from, to want to understand what they mean when they say these words. And that's what it is to get over words having no meaning. You must want to understand their definitions of the words. So how you get over this in an argument? You must define the words. Words must be defined, because you can pretty much be certain that both individuals will have different meanings to the same words you're using. You're using the same words, except you're putting different meanings into it. And so you must establish meanings, establish definitions, and only go forward when the definitions are established. So what does that look like? It means, what do you mean when you say this? What do you mean by this word? What is your definition of this word? And then you'll probably listen to it and you'll say, wow, they have a completely different definition of this word. And this is probably where the misunderstanding comes from. It's because they have a different definition of this word. Oftentimes, they're completely opposite and contradictory of themselves, because a lot of people live with cognitive dissonance. A lot of people live in, and it's not their fault. It's because I believe that people do the best with what they have. You must believe that of yourself. People not only do they do the best of what they have, the knowledge that they have, but they can only do the best with the knowledge that they have. And so it's not their fault that they have a different definition for it. Maybe they're correct, maybe they're not. It's just they're doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have. And so you must establish definitions, number one. Because words in and of themselves have no meaning. Oftentimes, people will have different definitions of the most banal and simple of words, and so you must come down to an agreement as to what a particular word actually means. Number two, communication equals appreciation. The goal of communication is understanding. It's not my blabbering my words here to just hear myself speak. My goal is for you to understand what I'm saying so that I can make an impact on you. I want to make an impact, and so in order for me to do that, I must communicate in a way that you will appreciate. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, if the other person doesn't appreciate what you're communicating, then you're arguing for no reason, because you're arguing not for the goal of understanding. If you actually wanted understanding, meaning you want to understand them and you want them to understand you, or you hope that they understand you, you would like to communicate in a way that they appreciate. What do I mean by appreciate? Appreciate doesn't mean being thankful or having gratitude. To appreciate something is to understand the full worth and value of something. So your goal is that they understand the full worth of what you're saying. Appreciation just essentially is tantamount to understanding. So the goal of communication is understanding. And your goal is to communicate with them using words, maybe even some sign language and some dancing. I'm kidding. But using words, communicate with them so that they can understand. Perhaps you might use words that they use. Perhaps you must use language that they use, because if you use a different language, or if you use words that are beyond their level, or something they can't understand, or they're words that they have no idea what they mean, or what the general public means, then your goal is not their understanding. So seek that you understand them. And here's what that sounds like. Here's what that looks like. When you're communicating with them, you say, my goal is to understand you, and so could you explain again what you were just saying, what you meant by what you said? Now we're going beyond the definitions of particular words. We're now going into asking what they actually mean by that. Tell me more about that. So the Socratic Method, hold on one second, let me fix the light. All right, I am back. I just fixed the light a little bit. There's something called the Socratic Method. Socrates, what he would do when he was arguing with people is he would pretend as if he knew nothing. And he began with the premise, I know nothing. Could you give me your position? I want to understand your position. And so this is what it is. This is a fantastic way for you to go about something. When your goal is to understand somebody, apply the Socratic Method. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Could you explain more? Tell me more about that. And then when you get their position, when you feel you understand their position, what you could perhaps do is you could repeat their position. So what you mean is, by your saying that is, and then you explain their position. And then, is that correct? And then they will feel something that most people don't get. They will feel either appreciation, and they will actually feel appreciation, meaning that you understand the full worth and value of what they said, you appreciate them, and they feel understood. And so oftentimes, more often than you think, more often than you imagine, more often than not, just your understanding their position is enough to convince them, okay, now I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to buy into you because you understand where I'm coming from. When they feel understood, this is actually a really powerful technique in negotiation. Now, this is just a brief overview of these principles, like negotiation. This is a fantastic negotiation skill. Oftentimes people, when they negotiate, what they actually want is to be understood. This is especially important I learned this from a crisis negotiator, an FBI negotiator. I forgot his name. But I go more about this in the Great Relationships University. So we talk about negotiating and how to apply persuasion and influence, and what is in influence, what is in persuasion, what are the strategies of persuasion that this comes from, or that comes from this particular idea. And when you apply it in communication, you become effective. When you apply it in relationships, and when you apply it in negotiations, everything is a negotiation. Mark my words, everything is a negotiation. When you agree on their definition, what you've done is you've negotiated. Whenever you make an agreement, a social agreement, It's essentially a social contract. It's essentially negotiation. But I digress. Communication is appreciation. When they feel understood, they will buy into your argument. So the first thing you have to do is to understand their definitions. And then second thing you have to do is to understand where they're coming from. What is their position? What do they mean? Truly understand them, and they will feel understood. You will have the empathetic advantage when you repeat to them their position so as to appear as you understand them. And you do understand them, but they want to see it. Number 3 is, I'm going to skip the previous number 3. I'm going to put that last. So number 4 is epiphanies are self-induced. What do I mean by that? It means that you can't give epiphany to anyone. You can't give epiphany to anyone. Epiphanies are self-induced. Epiphanies are self-created. Epiphanies can come from only themselves. So what does that tell you? It tells you that you cannot change anyone. You cannot change anyone. This goes into the last tip, by the way. Don't seek to change anybody. Only they can change themselves. The best you can do. Remember, I'm going to touch on this briefly, but authority equals responsibility. You don't have authority over them, over their mannerisms, their behaviors, their thoughts. You don't have authority over that. So you can't take responsibility over it. You cannot take responsibility over which you don't have authority because they're conjoined. They're inseparable. You can't have authority and no responsibility. And you can't have responsibility over something you don't have authority. You can't have control over their emotions, their thoughts. You can't control them. You can't change them. The only thing you can do is, the best thing you can do is influence them, inspire them, motivate them, inspire them to perhaps think about these ideas, consider these thoughts, consider these ideas, and maybe the epiphany will come in and of their own accord. So what do you do to create these epiphanies? I'll show you what to do to create epiphanies. Are you ready? The ego's job. Now we talk a lot about the ego, and we actually had, I don't know, it was like a 4-hour video training completely on mindset and ego and enlightenment in the Great Relationships University online course. But the ego, its sole job is to not be diminished. I want you to remember that always. The ego's job is to not be diminished. I want to make sure my audio is on. Okay. What does that mean? Your ego's job is to prevent you from embarrassment. Your ego's job is to prevent you from trying things that would risk embarrassment, that would risk you appearing little in the eyes of other people. Your ego's job is to prevent you from appearing smaller in the eyes of other people. So your ego's job is to prevent you from doing something new, and your ego's job is to protect your preconceptions. Your ego's job is to protect your preconceptions. When you attack someone's preconceptions, when you attack what someone already knows and believes to be true, their ego will go headbutt against you, and you will not have a productive conversation. So how do you get over that? How do you create the epiphanies in their mind? Epiphany after epiphany. What you do is you provide the ego new information that it did not know before. You provide the ego new information. This requires that you know what you're talking about. This requires that you have information that they didn't previously know. This requires that you have insight that you can impart, that you can communicate with that person in words that they understand, in a way that they can appreciate. Impart insight that they may not have already considered. This technique is something we teach in the Great Relationships University. It's fantastic in sales. When you give somebody insight, it's fantastic in communication. Essentially, the reason for that is because the ego's job is to not be diminished. That's all it is. It's not there for your own good. It would rather save itself than your being cured from an injury. You're bleeding to death. You have a cut on your leg and you're bleeding to death, and your ego says, no, I'm okay. I don't need the hospital. I'll be fine. A lot of people are like that. Oh no, I don't like doctors. It's okay. I'll get over this. Your ego is not there for you. It's there for itself. Your sole job of your ego is to not be diminished. And so for you to be able to communicate and argue with somebody who already has preconceptions, you have to provide them with new information. Do you understand? I like to consider teachers to be a misnomer. Teachers shouldn't be teachers. Teachers should be information counselors. People who guide people to the information. Anyway, so provide the ego, because epiphanies, you can't give someone epiphanies. They can only have epiphanies in and of themselves. Epiphanies are self-induced. Number 4, arguments is a realm of intellect. Arguments are in the realms of intellect. Intellect means reason and understanding. Reason, logic, evidence, understanding. It is not in the realm of emotion. What does that tell you? It means that when you approach an argument, don't be emotional about it. Be intellectual about it. How are you going to provide the person their ego with new information if you're not approaching it intellectually? You're approaching it emotionally. Remember, emotion comes from thoughts. And so what is it that makes you emotional about your argument? I appreciate that you're emotional because you're arguing your position, and that's the reason why you're emotional. But if you want to have an intelligent argument, you must remain in the realm of intellect. Arguments are in the realm of intellect, not emotion. Emotion doesn't move the argument forward. Do you understand? It doesn't mean that you're not going to feel emotional. You're going to feel emotional because you're trying to preserve, you're trying to point out your point to somebody. This is a very, very hard thing to trying to influence and persuade somebody. It takes a lot of intelligence, takes a lot of emotional intelligence, takes a lot of skill, and takes a lot of empathy. It's not an easy thing to do. But remember that for you to have an intelligent argument, you must remain in the realm of intellect. You must remain in the realm of logic, evidence, reasoning, and understanding. Final tip is, there are 3 kinds of people who you'll argue with. Some will get it with explanation. Some will get it without explanation. And some will never get it. Let me say that again. Some will get it with explanation, some will get it without explanation, and some will never get it. And that's okay. Some people will never get it. Authority equals responsibility. Your apathy must become sublime. Some people will never get it. Some people it takes a while to get it. All the best you can do is influence, inspire, and motivate them to consider a few things. The best you can do is the best you can do. The best you can do is inspire them to consider ideas. Inspire their ego, provide their ego with new information so that they can consider it. And perhaps if they're the kind of person who doesn't get it then, their ego will simmer on that thought. They'll never go back to the thought that they had before. They'll have that thought and they'll think on it, they'll simmer on it, and at some point their ego will say, you know what, that makes more sense, that makes better sense. And if you are the kind of individual that requires the satisfaction of the power of winning, you'll never be a good argumentator. For you to have a good argument, for you to be good at arguments, for you to have an intelligent argument, you must release yourself from the outcome. Because remember, you can't take authority, you can't take responsibility over which you have no authority. You have no authority over them. And some people will never get it. Some people takes a while to get it, and that is okay. Because if you communicate in a way which they don't appreciate, if you offend them, it doesn't move the argument forward. You've now used emotion to attack them. If you attack them, that means you violated number one, or actually number two. The goal of communication is understanding. If you attack them, if you offend them on purpose, some things are not on purpose, but some things are on purpose. If you offend them on purpose, then you've violated rule number two, which is communication requires understanding. Your goal is no longer to understand them, your goal is to be right. Now, if you got some value out of this, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to know more communication and relationships and mindset courses, we have over 10 plus hours of in Great Relationships University, an online course where you can log in, you can watch the training videos, and you have access on the videos. Watch it anytime you want. 10 plus hours teaching you the mindsets, communication skills, relationships skills. And yes, 6 primary courses that teach you mindset, enlightenment, social dynamics, how to communicate and speak well and speak hypnotically, neurolinguistic processes of communication, how to negotiate well, how to sell better, how to influence better, how to persuade better, and relationships mastery, going over how to do what you need to consider in relationships, how to have critical thinking in relationships, and how to manage your relationships so that it's based on fundamental principles. Check that out. See a GRU ambassador. Likely the person that shared this video is a Great Relationships University ambassador. Hit them up. If you don't know any that is a Great Relationships University ambassador, hit me up. I'm an ambassador myself for the company. All right. I will talk to you soon. Leave a comment below. Let me share me with your thoughts, and even leave with me if you learned something new, if I provided your ego something new in this video. And I appreciate it when you hit the thumbs up button, the like button, and comment and share this video. I appreciate it. I will talk to you on the next live broadcast. Bye-bye.